Nobody said anything. That is what gets me about that morning. The screens went flat and the data cut off, and everyone in Mission Control already knew. But the room stayed quiet, because if you say it out loud, it becomes a different kind of thing, and nobody was ready for it to be that kind of thing yet. February 1st, 2003, 9:12 a.m. Columbia had 16 minutes left. Rick Husband had just told his crew to enjoy the ride home. Laurel Clark was looking out the window. She said the colors were beautiful. Somewhere over Texas, people were pulling off the highway to stare at streaks of light crossing the morning sky, and none of them knew what they were looking at. Some of them pulled out their phones. Some of them just stood there. Nobody yet understood that what they were watching had names. To understand what happened in those 16 minutes, you have to go back 16 days. And to understand those 16 days, you have to understand something about how organizations handle danger when the danger has never actually hurt anyone yet. January 16th, 2003. Columbia lifts off from Kennedy Space Center at 10:39 in the morning. 7 people on board. Rick Husband is the commander, former Air Force test pilot, grew up in Amarillo, Texas, the kind of man who talked openly about his faith in a profession where most people keep that sort of thing private. Willie McCool is the pilot, first space flight, ran ultra marathons on weekends, not because anyone asked him to, but because he wanted to know where his edges were. Kalpana Chawla is on her second flight, aerospace engineer. Grew up in Haryana, India, watching small prop planes land near her house, and decided somewhere around age 8 that she was going to do that. Michael Anderson runs payload operations, quiet in a specific way, the kind of quiet that comes from having thought seriously about risk and arrive somewhere on the other side of it. David Brown is a physician and former Navy flight surgeon who tried for years to become an astronaut, and when he finally got selected, he just kinda never stopped looking slightly amazed about it. Laurel Clark wrote to her son before the mission, told him she hoped he could feel her pride from up there. And Ilan Ramon is the first Israeli ever to fly in space, fighter pilot, participated in the 1981 strike on the Iraqi nuclear reactor, survived things that most people reading this cannot imagine. And he brought with him into orbit a pencil drawing made by a 14-year-old boy named Peter Ginz, who died in Auschwitz in 1944. The drawing was called Moon Landscape. Ramon wanted the boy to reach space even though the boy never got to. 81 seconds after liftoff, something happened that none of them felt. A piece of foam insulation broke off the external fuel tank. Not a small flake. The size of a briefcase, engineers estimated later when they went back through the launch camera footage frame by frame. It hit the leading edge of the left wing. The leading edge was reinforced carbon composite, one of the hardest materials on the shuttle, specifically designed to take the heat of re-entry. But hard against heat and hard against impact are different things, and the foam hit it at a speed that made the difference matter. When the engineering team ran their damage simulation software, the results came back outside the boundaries the model was built to handle. Not slightly outside, the program essentially ran out of road. The impact was larger than anything the tool had been designed to assess, and so the tool could not tell them what the impact had done, and they were left with a question and no instrument capable of answering it. So they asked for satellite photos. Military satellites were already in orbit. The resolution was good enough. Point 1 at Columbia's left wing, and you'd know within hours whether there was a hole, whether the carbon panel had cracked, whether the question had an answer that anyone needed to worry about. The request went up through the chain of command at NASA. It came back denied. The reasoning, laid out later in emails and meeting notes that the investigation board would spend months reading, was that even if the wing was damaged, there was nothing the crew could do about it. Columbia wasn't close enough to the International Space Station to reach it. There was no rescue vehicle on standby, no repair kit for a hole in a carbon leading edge panel at orbital velocity. So, what would knowing accomplish? Knowing would cause distress. Distress without any available remedy was its own kind of cruelty. Better to let them work and sleep and call home and not spend their last 2 weeks in space afraid of something they couldn't change. 7 people floated around up there for 16 days, not knowing anyone on the ground was sitting on a question about whether they'd make it home. An engineer named Rodney Rocha didn't let it go. He'd seen the simulation results. He knew what outside the model's range meant in practice. He sent emails, flagged the concern through informal channels, got redirected, used the official process, submit a formal request, fill out the right form. He filled out the form, sent it through. For a while, people responded. Then the responses slowed. Then they stopped. Not because anyone told them to stop. The question just got quieter and quieter until it wasn't really a question anymore. It was just something that had been raised and noted and set aside. And Columbia's mission continued. Ilan Ramon wrote in his diary every day. He described looking down at the Mediterranean and being able to see Israel from space, this tiny strip of coast, and what that felt like. Laurel Clark sent emails home about the light, the way the sunrise looked when you were above the atmosphere and there was nothing filtering it, how she kept trying to put it into words and kept falling short. Rick Husband recorded a video message for his church congregation back in Texas. David Brown floated around the mid-deck with that expression he always had. Willie McCool probably still hadn't fully accepted that he was actually in space. Kalpana Chawla ran her experiments. Michael Anderson did his job the way he always did his job, which was without drama. None of them knew, not one of them. On the morning of February 1st, they got up early. Suit up, strap in, run the checklists, the long ones, the ones they'd done in simulators so many times they could do them half asleep. Mission Control gave them a clean weather report for the landing strip at Kennedy. Everything reading normal on every instrument. Husband and McCool went through the entry procedures. Somewhere in there, maybe 20 minutes before entry interface, Laurel Clark told Mission Control she was doing great. She was doing great. 8:44 a.m. Columbia hit the top of the atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean. Re-entry doesn't have engines. People forget that. The shuttle at this point is just falling at a very specific angle, an angle calculated to use atmospheric friction to bleed off the orbital velocity gradually instead of all at once, because all at once is a fireball. The friction generates heat that would kill everyone on board in seconds if the thermal protection system wasn't working. During re-entry, the superheated plasma surrounding the vehicle cuts all radio contact. 12 minutes of nothing. Every controller at Mission Control knows about the blackout period. They've all sat through it multiple times. They still hate every second of it because for 12 minutes there is genuinely nothing to do except watch the clock and wait for the signal to come back and not finish the thought that starts with what if. The signal didn't come back. What investigators eventually reconstructed from the wreckage and the flight recorder data was this. The foam had punched a hole in one of the reinforced carbon panels on the leading edge of the left wing. During re-entry, the superheated plasma outside the vehicle found that hole the way water finds a crack in a wall and started flowing into the wing's interior. Temperature readings inside the left wing began climbing in ways they weren't supposed to climb. At 8:52, 4 hydraulic sensors in the left main landing gear dropped offline at the same moment, not sequentially, simultaneously, which meant whatever was happening inside the wing had reached the point where it was taking out systems. At 8:54, Mission Control received an automated data fragment from Columbia that stopped in the middle. Not an error code, not a warning flag. The transmission just ended, the way a phone call ends when someone on the other end stops being there. The crew felt something change before the end. The flight recorder made it through, and the data on it showed the autopilot fighting in the final 2 minutes, making corrections faster and faster as the aerodynamic forces on the left side of the vehicle became strange. A shuttle with a compromised wing doesn't fly like a shuttle with an intact wing, and the autopilot was working as hard as it could to compensate for a problem it wasn't designed to compensate for. The crew would have felt it in the controls, not known what it meant, not immediately, but felt it. Something wrong, something the checklist didn't have a box for. 8:59 and 32 seconds. Rick Husband keyed his radio. He said, "Roger, and then there was nothing. That was the last transmission. In mission control, the data streams went flat in sequence. The tracking cameras lost the signal. Then the phones started. People calling from towns across East Texas and Louisiana, saying there were lights in the sky, moving fast. What was it? Was it something from the space program? Was something wrong? Something was wrong." Columbia broke apart at roughly 63 kilometers altitude, moving at about 18 times the speed of sound. It didn't explode the way people picture explosions. It came apart in pieces over the course of several minutes, each piece burning individually as it separated, each one its own streak of light moving across the morning sky from west to east. People filmed it. Some of them had never seen anything like it. Some of them thought meteor shower. The debris field ran hundreds of kilometers through East Texas and Louisiana, and it took teams of searchers working for months to go through all of it. They found things that didn't make sense. Ilan Ramon's diary survived. Scorched, pages fused together from the heat and the impact and the fall from 63 kilometers up. But the Hebrew letters were still legible. Conservators spent years on it, working page by page, and recovered most of what he'd written. His observations about looking down at Earth, notes about the experiments, what the food tasted like, the small, ordinary texture of days in a place that wasn't ordinary at all. A video the crew had recorded during the mission came back too. Them in the mid-deck, floating, someone made a joke, everyone laughed, you can see it on their faces. A personal photograph. Small things. The things you bring when you want something from home nearby because you're going somewhere home isn't. The moon landscape drawing made it back. 6 months the investigation board spent going through everything. Every email, every meeting record, every decision. The report they produced is several hundred pages, and it's one of the more unsettling documents you'll read if you read it the whole way through. Because it's not a story where someone did something terrible. The senior manager who sent the email after the foam strike saying she was comfortable with where things stood, not losing sleep over it. She wasn't a bad person. She'd worked at NASA for years. She'd seen foam come off the tank before. The shuttle had always come back. She had the same information everyone else had, and she came to the same conclusion everyone else had come to. And that conclusion had been correct every single previous time. She trusted the engineers who'd reviewed the data. The engineers who reviewed the data trusted the simulation results up to the point where the simulation ran out of range. And then they trusted that outside the range probably meant a bigger version of what inside the range had always meant, which was manageable. The board called it normalization of deviance. You see a risk, nothing bad happens. You see it again, still nothing. After enough repetitions, the risk stops registering as a risk. It registers as background. It becomes part of how things are, rather than part of what could go wrong. Foam had shed on previous flights, and those flights had come home, and so foam shedding was a thing NASA knew about and monitored and had decided was not in the category of things that ended missions. Until the one time it was exactly that. After Columbia, NASA changed things, new reporting structures, new protections for people who raised concerns through informal channels instead of official ones, new rules about imagery requests. They would be taken seriously, full stop. The shuttle flew again, 22 more times over the following years, and all 22 crews came back, and the program ended in 2011 on its own terms. Whether the reforms were the right ones is impossible to say in advance. You only find out in the moment something goes wrong. Columbia was that moment. Challenger in 1986 had been that moment before it. Both times the system failed to catch something it should have caught, and both times the investigation found the same basic thing underneath. Not malice, not negligence in the obvious sense, just a slow accumulation of small decisions that each made sense and together made something no one intended. Ilan Ramon's diary is in a museum now, in Israel. The moon landscape drawing is there beside it, behind glass. A sketch of the moon made by a boy who was killed before he turned 15, carried into orbit by a man who wanted him to get there, fallen back to Earth in a debris field in Texas, recovered by searchers who didn't know what they'd found until they did, preserved by conservators who spent years on the pages, displayed now so that people who never knew either of them can stand in front of it and think about what it means that it made it back when the vehicle carrying it didn't. Some things survive what should finish them. The questions Columbia left are still here. What you owe the people you send somewhere they can't easily come back from. Whether protecting someone from fear is ever worth keeping them from the truth. Who gets to make that call? Whether the answer changes when the stakes are higher, or when the distance is greater, or when there's genuinely nothing to be done. These questions didn't burn up over Texas. They're in the training materials now. They're in the culture. They're in the room every time someone has to decide whether to tell a crew something that might frighten them and can't be fixed. The distances are getting longer. Mars is 7 months out. Further destinations are further still. The gap between what the people on the ground know and what the people in the vehicle know is going to get harder and harder to close, and the consequences of what falls into that gap are going to get harder and harder to come back from. Rick Husband told his crew to enjoy the ride home with 16 minutes left. He had every reason to think that's what it was going to be. Laurel Clark looked out the window and said the colors were beautiful. They were, right up until they weren't.